Today's headline is a notable game of marbles. The subheadline says, a clergyman's story of the game which he and Arthur played and Garfield watched. This article originally was a communication of the Brewster Standard. It was originally reported from Carmel on February 20th. It says, I wish sincerely to thank you for the able and accurate report in the Standard of last week of the proceedings at my ecclesiastical silver wedding, a happy phrase for which I am indebted to Professor G.C. Smith and the Honorable John H. Ketchum. In the biographical sketch you gave of me, you refer with a slight inaccuracy to an incident in my boyhood when I played at marbles with the presidents Garfield and Arthur. Since the death of one and the call of the other to fill his place as president of the Union, I have several times related the circumstances and social intercourse, but it has not hitherto appeared in print. With your permission, I will relate the incident just as it occurred for your paper. At the time of the incident, the Reverend William Arthur, Doctor of Divinity, the father of the president, and the Reverend James A. Garfield, an uncle as I am led to believe of our deceased president, and after whom he was named, were Baptist pastors within 5 miles of each other, the Reverend Mr. Garfield being at Schuylerville, and the Reverend Dr. Arthur at Union Village, now called Greenwich, New York. Both were friends and visitors in the united family of my father and grandfather, and frequent guests at the family home in Boston. My grandfather, Judge William Stillwell, was the chief attraction to them and to the other ministers who came there. He was notoriously strong in his religious creed and a fluent and able talker. Certain church doings in which he was prominent gave to his creed a particular emphasis just at that time, and he had to meet the attacks of a number of able controversialists. I remember several such contests when the air was as blue with the smoke from tobacco pipes as the creed they battled over was deep-colored with Calvinism. I think, too, that he inoculated me with not a little of his high sovereignty views, and I hold them still in pretty full measure. How the game began. One day, the Reverend Dr. Arthur came on a visit, and as usual, stayed overnight. He had his little son, now the president, with him. We slept together. The next day, it being springtime, we had a game of marbles on the garden walk near the gate that opened upon the dooryard. While we were at the game, the Reverend Mr. Garfield drove into the yard. He stopped at the gate and lifted out of his wagon a little fellow, 4 or 5 years old, saying to us, Here, my lads, is my nephew Jimmy. Let him play with you while I attend to some business at the clerk's office and make a short visit in the house. Little Jimmy came running through the gate and curled up on a large bunch of chives bordering the walk and watched us at the game. He took no hand in the game, being too small for that, some 3 or 4 years the junior of myself if I remember correctly. To account for President Garfield being there at Boston at this early age, I recall, though indistinctly, some allusion in the talk of the family about the death of a brother of the Reverend Mr. Garfield, and that his young widow, known now to the world as Grandma Garfield, had come on a visit to him from Ohio about some family matters, and had brought along her little son named after him. His ride down to Boston with his uncle was the occasion of his casual meeting in my company with the boy with whom in manhood he was to hold such high political relations. I distinctly remember the face of the Reverend Mr. Garfield, the same cast of features as the deceased president. I remember well the horse he drove, a splendid sorrel. He had a great passion for a horse and a reputation for possessing the skill of an old turfman in picking out a good one and trading off an inferior one to get him, a weakness which people are not accustomed to excuse as being harmless to the proprieties of the clerical profession. He shortly after removed to the West and died there. Doubtless the mother of the deceased president, if appealed to, could substantiate or refute my recollections of the visit referred to, and tell whether the Reverend Garfield was a brother or other relative of her deceased husband. My own parents are very aged, and while they remember the frequent visits of these ministers and others, they do not recall this particular occasion, but I have a specific reason for remembering it. The meeting of these lads at the game of marbles, whether one was a deceased Garfield or not, is indelibly fixed in my memory by a little family episode, in which my father took for him an unusual and astonishing part, such business being always handed over to the mother, and which occurred within 5 minutes sharp after Dr. Arthur had left with his son, and before the return of the Reverend Mr. Garfield from the clerk's office, and the episode culminated on myself. Unfortunately, my head got in the way and kept in the way of certain motions of my father's hands on either side of it, called boxing the cars, for my neglect to rake over the dooryard, as I had been told to do. It was a terrible boxing because he was not used to it, he remarking as he went vigorously through the exercises that the same treatment was due or right to that little Chet Arthur, who heard him tell me to attend to the matter and coax me off to the more congenial amusement of playing at marbles. I did not then, nor do I now, charge my misfortune to the president. It was no misfortune, for what boy with any snap in him can get along happily in his young life and grow up and be respectable without such compliments? In this instant, doubtless, it served to fix in my mind a certain game of marbles, which in light of modern events, both joyous and intensely tragical, has become a remarkably suggestive incident. As I went to the polls of the last presidential election, I was pondering it over in my mind. Well, thought I, after the lapse of the usual lifetime, the three lads come together again. Garfield and Arthur on the same ticket, without even the thought of standing in this relation to each other up to the moment of their respective nominations, just as in boyhood they were brought together with as little design. And I, as pleased to be with them on the playground then, as I am proud to vote for them now. But, thought I, this game is a more serious affair. Alas, how serious it has proved to be to the one, how responsible to the other. This article was written by W.S. Clapp. This story came from the great state of Kansas, being reported in a weekly Kansas Chief of March 15, 1883. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, now remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.